Welcome! I'm Michelle Anderson of Clarinet Mentors, and today I want to show you a little trick that can really help improve your tone and also your smoothness in playing. I find people ask me about ways to improve tone more than almost anything else, so this is an easy trick for you to learn, and I'll show you a couple different ways you can use it in your own practice routine. What I want to show you is a system of practicing that involves opening our mouth quite a bit wider than we usually would. So normally we put our mouth into the right shape for a good clarinet embouchure, we blow fast air, and hopefully we get a great sound through the instrument. For this exercise, we're going to be loosening our jaw quite a bit on the reed so that when we blow through the clarinet, all we really get is a hissing of air through the instrument. I call it whispering. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to put the clarinet in my mouth, open my jaw very loose, and just blow air through there. And this feels very awkward, so I know it's going to feel strange when you first try it, and instinctively our mouth wants to close and make a sound, but if it starts to do that, you'll start to hear a note coming through. And if you hear that, we don't want to do that for this exercise. You want to make it loose again. So you'll have to train yourself a little bit how to play with that very open embouchure to get the whisper sound. This whisper sound technique of blowing air through where we're just getting a hiss can really help us improve two things in our playing, and I'll show you how we can use that. One of the bad habits that many, in fact, I would say every clarinet player has to some extent, is that when we blow, we tend to accent with our air each new note as we change our fingers. I think it's just hardwired into human beings that we do it. So if I were to exaggerate that, let's say I was playing a really simple scale, C major scale, switching from note to note. What tends to happen is that as we change notes, we accent the air a little bit, so our airstream does this. And each note gets a new puff of air. We do that instinctively. It doesn't come out of the instrument sounding nice. And in fact, it makes our tone a bit irregular, and it kind of adds bumps into the music. If I were to exaggerate that a bit, you can hear it when I play those 5 notes. Now, I was doing it quite a bit for that illustration, but I would challenge you to record yourself playing C, D, E, F, G, and you'll probably hear a little bit of that in there. So one of the things we want to do to help get a smooth, beautiful sound on our instrument is to get rid of those bumps. If we were to try those same 5 notes whispering through the instrument, for some reason when we whisper, we can hear our airstream a little bit better, and I find that people notice whether they're huffing or not, and it's easier for them to get rid of those huffs and get the beautiful smooth airstream that we want. So for the exercise, we loosen our mouth, we want to play as loudly as we can with our hiss. And this is tricky too, because usually when we put more air through, our mouth likes to bite down and then we get real sound. But you just want to whisper. So I'm going to get my fingers on there, I'm going to play those same 5 notes, whispering as loudly as I can. Now, once you get your mouth set for this, you might wonder, why am I doing this? Why am I whispering? Is this doing me any good? Well, yeah, I'll answer you. It is doing you some good in 2 ways. First of all, I want you to listen for those accents and those huffs, and if you hear them, the next time you try it, just focus on your air being like a human air hose. And listening for that sound coming out of your instrument. It'll help you play smoother. The second part of this exercise, though, is I want you to use your air to make the hiss as loudly as you possibly can. And what you're going to find is that you run out of breath far faster than you would in normal playing. It's because there's very little resistance coming through the instrument when we're that open. Sometimes if I'm trying to play a couple bars of music using this technique, I'll have to breathe quite often, way more than I usually would. For those first 5 notes, I'm practically out of breath by the time I demonstrate that to you, if I'm really doing this properly. What I would ask my students to do is to play those 5 notes and get their air really smoothly and really loudly, and the loud part fixes our second common bad habit. Most people don't play clarinet with a fast enough airstream to really get the most beautiful resonant sound that they can. And you want to sound beautiful, and you want to have lots of color in your tone. When we hiss or whisper loudly like that, it really activates our blowing muscles, which are, kind of down here around the belly button. To hiss loudly, we have to use those muscles to really move the air quickly. And that speed is something we want to incorporate into our playing all the time. It's kind of easy to do when we're we have a tangible result, like listen for a loud hiss. Gets those muscles going. So I'll ask my students to take whatever bit of music they're working on, do it hissing when it's loud and smooth, then to immediately play it again with the proper embouchure and real notes, but to try and emulate the same air stream. And I, without fail, find that they play with warmer, smoother, more sparkly tone. So you achieve smoothness and resonance. So let's use the example of my 5-note scale. The first time I was quite huffy. I'm going to hiss it as loudly as I can. I'll pause, take a breath, and then I'll play it for real. And we'll see if it's smoother, warmer, more resonant than the first time. Now, it might not be as smooth as I would want to get it in the long run, but it's a lot better. In a moment, if you want to see how we could use this in a piece of music, I've put out a little excerpt for you. And it's an excerpt from the famous Adagio by Albinoni. So if you'd like to print out your own copy to follow along, you can. If you're hearing this from the Clarinet Mentors newsletter, there's a link in the newsletter to it. Or if you happen to be catching this on YouTube or something, there'll be a link in the description written below this. Let's take a look at the music here, the Adagio by Albinoni. It's a beautiful piece of music. You may have heard of it before, and even if you hadn't, it's still a nice piece of music to play. One of the things that makes it tricky as a clarinetist is that most of the phrases have go from the high register down into the low register, but musically we want to be crescendoing. So this requires us to be really crescendoing with our air as we go down. Now, how would this hissing exercise help us? Well, I already mentioned earlier that it really activates our blowing muscles and gets us using them more effectively. That can be really important when we're trying to get a crescendo into our lower, wimpier notes, as is written in this excerpt here. The other thing is, we know that to play high notes softly is tricky. Now, I didn't put in any dynamics into this excerpt, but usually it's written piano. And it's hard to come in on a high E piano with good tone. And the key to that is that we're using really fast air. So let's just look at the first 2 measures here. I'll play the tune just so you recognize it or see if it sounds familiar to you. That's our main tune. We're aiming for the downbeat of the second bar, which is our throat tone A. If you haven't heard that expression, these notes at the top of the clarinet, the A and the B flat, their nickname is the throat tones, and they don't sound so good. The first note, our high E, in most clarinets, it comes out loud and clear. We want that A to be the louder one. So the common problems that I would see people have with this is that if they weren't really focusing on the crescendo, they would go from loud to soft, and it would sound something like this. It's okay, but it doesn't have that mysterious beauty that we can get when we get a really smooth crescendo into the second bar. The second common problem that you might have with this piece is, again, our tendency to bump each note. And I'll overdo it, but that would come out like this. So even though I kind of did follow the shape of the crescendo and the diminuendo, it wasn't very smooth. So it's tricky to put all that together. One of the techniques I would use if I was working on a piece like this, and I do use regularly, is that whisper technique. I would try the first 2 measures, and I might not even make it through them in one breath. I might have to breathe often, and that's okay for this exercise. I would loosen my mouth, hiss it as loudly as I can, and my 2 areas of focus are loudness and smoothness, and I would practice that with my mouth open. So I'll demonstrate it with loudness but not smoothness, and maybe you can even hear the whispering bumps that we tend to do. There we go. I was so busy concentrating on bumping loudly, I think I even threw a wrong note in there. And if you did, you might hear that too. That's often how it will come out. It was loud, and then I could hear those bumps, and I might think to myself, wow, I'm really bumping that. So I would try it again with the focus on smoothness. now I'm totally out of breath. That's okay. If we're doing this exercise properly, we're going to be running out of air really quickly, but boy, is that activating my breathing muscles. After I do that, I'll try playing it with proper embouchure, but that same kind of smooth, deep air. And what I mean by deep air is I'm really feeling these muscles working. When I was running out of air there, I could feel those muscles crunching. Here we go, playing it for real. This really helps me play smoother, and I encourage you to try it as well. And you don't have to hiss the whole song, although boy would that be great practice for your airstream. If you were to do all of the measures I've written here, which is probably 12 measures or so, you would end up taking many breaths, and that's okay. I encourage my students when they do this to breathe whenever they're not playing loudly, even if it's in the middle of a phrase, it's not very artistic. It's just an exercise to activate our airstream. So that's an example of how we could use it in a piece of music. Earlier I demonstrated how we could use it in a scale. I think you could adapt it to anything that you're working on, but it particularly works well in a slower, more mellow piece where we can really benefit from that smoothness and that really wonderful, fast air and sort of a mastery of being able to play high notes softer. So have some fun with this. Love for you to try it out. Let me know what you think of it. And if you enjoyed this video and you're not currently part of the Clarinet Mentors community, you can join really easily. That way when these videos like this come out, you get first access to them. We have a newsletter that comes out every 2 weeks, plus a series of free videos. And you can sign up for that at www.learnclarinetnow.com. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you on the next video.